Hey, what's up guys? Today, I'll show you a horror thriller film, Dark Ride. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The film begins in 1989 in New Jersey. Two twin girls wander through an abandoned amusement park and approach a horror-themed ride. They ask the operator for a ticket, who jokes that the ride is one way. Subsequently, he lets them in for free and the ride begins. The girls are pulled into a dark tunnel filled with terrifying objects, the usual things you find on such a ride. Things go well initially, but at one point, a hand appears from an overpass and takes the heavy one of them away. The remaining girl gets scared and begins to panic. A few moments later, the ride stops next to an operating room. One of the dummies turns out to be a real person. He removes a blanket from a table, revealing the lifeless body of her sister. The girl screams in terror at the sight of her sister's bloody body. The scene is interrupted, and then we find out from a newspaper the news of their deaths. The newspaper reports that the police have found the killer, a mentally ill man who killed 14 other people besides the twins. Therefore, the killer has been sent and locked up in a well-guarded mental institution for treatment. 10 years pass, and the action shifts to a group of teenagers preparing for a trip. Specifically, Kathy and her best friend, Liz, plan to go on a trip along with 3 other boys. Kathy has been in love with the boy named Steve, and there has been tension between them lately as they keep breaking up again and again. Liz and the boy Jim have also had a relationship in the past, but now they are just friends. On the other hand, the nerdy boy named Nerd is the outcast, a movie fanatic who was only invited because he's Steve's friend. The group gets into Jim's van and hits the road. After a few hours, it gets dark and they stop at a gas station to refuel. The place seems deserted, and Nerd enters the cottage to look for someone to call for help. He discovers an elderly man asleep on a sofa. He talks to him, trying to wake him up, but the elderly man remains asleep. Nerd notices the calendar for the year 1978, and this seems strange to him. Soon after, he goes outside and asks his friends to keep an eye on the elderly man while he goes to the bathroom. Jim and Steve go to check, but the elderly man has disappeared without traces of his dying smell. When the two go outside, he appears from behind them and asks to pay for fuel. Nerd rejoins the others and shows them a flyer he found in the bathroom, advertising the Dark Ride. It shows that the place was recently reopened after being closed for 10 years following the deaths of the twins. Jim knows many disturbing stories related to the ride and convinces the others to visit it for fun. The group agrees to go, although Kathy is hesitant because she is afraid. The scene shifts 2 weeks earlier to a mental institution in Bayshore, where the Dark Ride killer is currently locked up. 2 orderlies are performing routine checkups on the patients. When they enter the killer's room, they mock him for being a vegetarian. The orderlies mistreat him, but the killer stares blankly. One of them continuously slaps his head with a piece of meat, not realizing that he's making the biggest mistake of his life. Furious, the killer stands up and ends up breaking the strap that held him bound. Then, with a flashlight, he penetrates the chest of one of the orderlies, spurting blood everywhere. The last orderly looks at him in terror and slowly backs away with his blood-stained shoes. He begins to scream as the killer approaches him, and then kills him by biting and chewing his juicy flesh, possibly from his smelly part. After killing him, the killer drags the body with him and escapes from the institution. Back in the present, the group is on their way to the amusement park to experience the Dark Ride. It turns out that they have a small budget issue, and to save money, Nerd suggests spending the night at the Dark Ride. The girls don't like the plan, but he insists. Jim is in the mood for fun, so he persuades them, and the girls reluctantly agree. A few hours later, Jim spots an attractive hitchhiker who stops them to ask for a ride. The boys are thrilled and welcome her with open arms. She is Jen, a very sociable and outgoing person who loves parties. When she finds out they are going to the Dark Ride, she insists on coming with them and offers her stash of pot to relax for the rest of the trip. When the group arrives at the amusement park, it appears to be closed. At one point, they spot a security guard helping a drunk man. When they walk away, the group intends to use this moment to enter the building. On the other hand, Kathy refuses to go, preferring to sleep in the vehicle. Before the others leave, she makes a snide comment about Steve and his new friend Jen. He realizes that she is jealous and tells her that he has missed her for the past few months. They decide to discuss their relationship the following day. The group heads to the back of the ride, except Kathy. Looking for an entrance, Jim finds a ladder and climbs to a higher platform. He manages to enter, but is immediately startled by the head of a dummy. He subsequently turns on the electricity and consequently the Dark Ride. Then he opens the door to let the rest of the group in. They take a look around and are fascinated by the spooky props and sets. Jim plays with a mannequin, but after realizing it has a destroyed face, he gets frightened and lays it on the floor. As the others go to another room, Nerd approaches the dummy and gently touches its face. In the next scene, we see the killer wearing a mask, standing on a platform. He has already returned to his old home and is preparing for a massacre. The group gathers at a place and tells stories. Everyone is having fun until Liz notices someone moving in the dark. She tells the others, but they start laughing. Jim begins to tell the story of the twins killed on this ride 10 years ago. He says the police report reveals that the girls were brutally murdered and half of their bodies are missing. He adds that the killer had the mental capacity of a 5-year-old child, and the killer was one of the adopted sons of the operator of this ride. While his brother was normal, he was malformed and had mental problems. Therefore, his father kept him imprisoned in the dark ride for most of his life. Since he grew up in this terrifying environment, violence was the only thing he knew. Jim reassures them by saying that the killer was killed during a police intervention. But at that point, Nerd interrupts him and states that the killer is still alive. Nerd bitterly reveals that the victim twins were his cousins, and that spending the night in this place seemed like the proper way to wrap things up. He recounts that the killer was caught by the police and then taken to a mental hospital. Despite the horrible things he did, Nerd sides with the killer. He argues that since the killer had the brain of a 5-year-old, he didn't kill but play with his victims. Since the only kind of play he had witnessed as a child was terrifying dummies that scare people, he linked the murder to fun. After hearing the story, the group feels sorry for the killer. They also apologize to Nerd for bringing up the subject. Jen picks up Steve and takes him to another room to look around. Suddenly, they come across Kathy's dead body. Someone has cut her throat and tied her to a chair. Scared to death, Steve starts screaming like a chicken, but Kathy bursts out laughing and reveals that it was a prank. She then high-fives Nerd and reveals that they had planned this before they even started the trip. Nerd insisted on staying overnight at the dark ride because Kathy wanted to teach Steve a lesson for sleeping with another girl while he was dating her. Steve gets furious, especially at Nerd, and then storms out the door. Nerd is embarrassed, and Jim tells him that he would beat him up if he did that to him. The group goes outside, but discovers that the door is locked. They ask Steve to open it, but no one answers, and then the power goes out. While the others wait, Jim decides to go down to the basement to turn on the power. In the next scene, we see Steve wandering inside the ride, while the killer is on his trail. Jen follows Jim into the basement, but instead of resolving the issue, they start kissing, but without using their smelly tongues. Jen gets the impression that someone is watching them, but Jim ignores her and says to continue their massage. Meanwhile, the other part of the group begins to worry because the two have not yet returned. They decide to go to the basement, and as they walk, Kathy notices a strange puppet. When she gets closer, she realizes that it is Steve's corpse covered in blood. In a panic, they take off running. Nerd reaches the cellar door, but finds it locked and starts calling Jim. Jen is giving Jim a weird massage, unaware that the crazed killer is watching them. While they continue to enjoy themselves, the killer comes out of hiding and cruelly cuts off Jen's head. Jim realizes this only when he takes her head to kiss it. Jim panics and tries to escape, but he bangs his head against a pipe and loses consciousness. For some strange reason, the killer doesn't kill Jim, but locks him inside and leaves with Jen's head. Jim wakes up and tries to escape from the cellar, but the door is locked. On the other hand, Kathy and Liz are near the entrance. Kathy blames herself for endangering everyone's lives. Panicked, Kathy leaves Liz alone and returns to the hallway to look for the others. As Liz wanders around, the killer comes out of a secret door and begins to follow her. Liz comes down the stairs and sees an axe on a higher platform. When she manages to grab it, the killer appears next to her, and Liz begins to run away, shouting as loud as she can. At one point, the killer grabs onto a net and terrorizes Liz, causing her to run away. Eventually, Liz finds herself in the operating room, where the victim twins were killed many years earlier. The killer pushes her hard against the wall and eventually kills her. Later, we see how he drags Liz's corpse. At the same time, Jim bursts through the cellar door and manages to escape. While looking for a way out, he comes across the killer, who drags Liz's body and flees. The killer chases him, but Jim is faster than the others, which makes him difficult to catch. A police officer has arrived outside the ride in response to a noise complaint. He carefully enters and shouts to see if anyone is there. Kathy is about to jump out of the window, but she hears his voice and follows it. The problem is that the killer hears it too and goes to chase away the unwanted guests. When Kathy and the policeman finally meet, the killer appears behind him and slowly raises a large blade. Kathy looks at him, shocked, unable to get out even a word to warn the policeman. The killer cuts the policeman's skull in half with a strong, precise blow. As the head splits in half, Kathy starts screaming and runs away. She reaches the window and jumps out, injuring her leg. She reaches the van and drives away. Meanwhile, Jim is still alive and trapped in the dark ride. Looking out the front door, he notices that their car is gone and loses all hope of survival. He wanders around sobbing, and the killer suddenly appears behind him. The killer hits him with his head against the wall, but Jim manages to escape, but not for long because he slams into a mirror and the killer catches up with him. As Kathy drives, she finds a message from Jim asking for help, so she decides to return. The killer continues to throw Jim all over the place, as if he were an adult toy. Eventually, he approaches and is about to kill him, but Kathy suddenly reappears and crashes the van into the wall, hitting the killer dead on. The killer lands on a wall full of nails, and Jim gets up to help Kathy, who has been stunned by the impact. Nerd appears out of nowhere and seems not to care what is happening. Jim lashes out at him and asks how he found his way out. Nerd approaches Jim, but stabs him repeatedly with an attitude of revenge. It is later revealed that Nerd is actually the killer's brother, who was adopted with him. Obviously, Nerd despised the way his friends treated him, so he dragged them to this place to make them pay. Nerd approaches his killer brother's corpse and takes his mask. Here it becomes obvious that the mask is the part of the dummy's face that Jim had found earlier. Therefore, the killer had prepared for this carnage from the beginning. When Kathy wakes up, Nerd thanks her for bringing her friends there, without suspecting anything. In the end, Nerd lets her go because she was the only one who treated him with dignity. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.